Hello viewers, here is a General Electric 3-speed electrically reversible window box VN. This is a product of the early 70s, and this is a very important VN in my collection because this was purchased, I believe, by my great-grandfather, and then my grandfather had it for a while, and then he gave it to me. So this has been in the family for a long time, and I remember this VN very well. I remember seeing it and using it at my grandfather's house all the time when I was younger. Here's the control set. Very nice control, very clear and easy to use and logical. It starts on low, goes to high. And then of course there's the infamous label that I put on all of the VNs at my grandparents' house at some point. And I think on the other side it has my ownership tag that I also put on all of their VNs. So there's that. And I just can't bring myself to take either of those things off, even though they really don't belong there. Here's the back of the VN. There's some labels there. I guess my grandfather probably wrote that on there. He did replace the cord on this VN because it frayed, as was a very common issue with these VNs over the years. The cords going in tended to fray at the flex point. It's kind of a thin cord, and it's a very aggressive flex that can happen on there depending on how you handle it. So that was replaced quite a while ago. Still has all these plastic clips there to keep the wire in place. Handle is still there. I think the information's tag that would have resided on the bottom has long worn off. Let's just check to be sure. Yeah, it was there, but it's gone. Or at least the informations that were on it are gone. I don't recall what the model number of this thing is offhand. I'll put it in the description. I don't know why nobody reads the description, but I'll put it in there anyways, just in case one person perhaps decides they want to see what the model is. I'm very fond of these VNs. I think they're very aesthetically pleasing. Their performance is really good, and they are of exceptional design and build quality. I think the design on these is extremely underappreciated, and I think these VNs receive a lot of criticism that they quite frankly don't deserve. These did have the infamous permanently lubricated motors, which of course is not a thing. There's no such thing as permanent lubrication. Oil is going to eventually evaporate or gum up or do something and stop being effective after so many years. It's just a property of oil. So there is no such thing as permanent lubrication. That's baloney. It doesn't exist. These claim to be permanently lubricated, as a lot of fans do today. It's bogus. Now, as far as these are concerned, there's no oil port, but unlike the stuff sold today, these tended to last with that oil that came out of the factory for quite a long time. People give these things a lot of flack because there's no oil port, and I agree, there should be an oil port, but these fans are getting to be 50 years old. Most of them have never been serviced, and yet a lot of them are still out there. I see these things out in the wild every now and again. I'll see them in a window, or I'll see them in a store or something in use. I do see these things out and about. They're not that scarce. For being 50 years old, there are a lot of these still running. And none of them have ever been oiled. So for the lubrication that was in there to last 50 years, it's hard to argue with that. These did use the unibearing motor, which is extremely difficult to service. I don't like that. But again, the motors are 50 years old. They're still running. It's hard to argue with that. It wasn't designed to be serviceable, but it was still designed to last. These were not designed to be disposable fans that get tossed out after a couple of years. These were designed to be around for a very long time. This is a reversible model. It has this ring around the guard here, which is not seen on any of the non-reversible models and is not seen on any of the metal-bladed models. And very few people seem to acknowledge this, but this is an absolutely amazing feat of engineering and design. That serves a purpose. That's not a cosmetic item. The purpose of that ring is if the fan fell while it was running in reverse and the blade, because it's only a plastic, bent forward momentarily as the absorbed the shock of falling, and the blade bent forward and hit the guard, it wouldn't break. It would just bounce off of this ring and keep running. If that ring wasn't there, the blade would bite into the guard and shatter. I've never seen one of these with a broken blade. That's got a lot to do with it. The blade is protected from the guard with that ring. It's a very simple thing. It doesn't take much to put a ring of metal on the guard, but somebody not only thought about it, and a whole team of engineers thought it was important enough and agreed that it should be on there, and then they put it on there, and they jacked up the price to compensate for it, and people still bought it because it was a good fan. You don't see design elements like that in the stuff sold today. You drop a fan today, it's broke. The plastic is going to shatter, the blades are going to break. That's it. You drop one of these, it still works. And this thing has taken a couple of falls over the years. It has fallen out of the window before, and there's not a scratch on it from any of the incidents that it's encountered. And this fan has been in use for most of its life. My grandfather used this thing regularly, every year, up until he gave it to me, like, I don't know, maybe about 10 years ago I got it. So this thing has 40 years of heavy use on it. And then however much I've used it over the years. And it still runs just fine. The only age that these things are really starting to show now is the bearings wear. And that's because the blades were not in the greatest of balance, which is disappointing. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to be upset about that when, to this day, 50 years later, you buy a fan and the blade is still not balanced. Which I don't understand, because 50 years ago, I understand that the manufacturing process and the design process and the precision machinery wasn't quite developed yet. Today, 50 years later, we have computer programs that should be able to design a 3D model of a flawlessly balanced piece of plastic, and we have machines that should be able to make that mold with 100% consistency from what was shown on the model, and they should be able to reproduce that thing thousands and thousands of times with perfect balance, with ease. That should not even be a second thought. That should be totally doable with the technology that we have now. And it's not. Well, it probably is, but they don't do it. Now, 50 years ago, there was no computer model. They were balancing them probably by hand, manually. In fact, a lot of these did have a balancing weight. I believe this one does as well. They had a balancing weight inside the hub, so they tried to make it better. I guess there was probably a margin of acceptable error that they would leave the factory with, because the resources at the time to make it flawlessly were just not there. So the blades weren't the greatest, but 50 years later, the blades still stink on any fan you buy today. So, I mean, can you really hold that against it? It's a plastic molded blade. You know, I don't know how great plastic molding was in the 70s. I don't know. Anyway, so they're not perfect. You know, they have some questionable things about them, but they're all running 50, well, not all of them, but a lot of them are still running 50 years later, and they're going to keep running. So I can't argue with the design. I can't argue with any of the decisions that they made when they designed the thing. It's a good product, and it is. It's all around a solid fan. So let's go ahead and turn this thing on. Plug has been replaced. I'll go to amps. I don't know what these are supposed to draw. I believe it's a 6-pole, straight to pole motor. Probably draws at least 2 amps, I would think. Probably a little bit more, maybe upwards of 3. It's got a lot of power to it. Let's keep it in the light. I'll try to get this out of the windstream. And we'll start it up on the low. And you can already see here, it's not in perfect balance. See the hub, it kind of shakes a little bit. Forget the tripod for a minute. It's not perfectly symmetrical. Which is not great, but you have to consider the time frame this was manufactured in and where plastic molding technology and things of that nature were at the time. It was not as developed as it is today. 50 years ago, I think a slightly out of balance blade was acceptable. Nowadays, it's not acceptable because the technology to balance a blade and to precision manufacture a plastic mold is more than available. They simply choose not to utilize it correctly. So this is running on low, and I think these are by far the quietest box fans that ever existed on low, because it's a very nice quiet low. It's very slow, and it's a really nice gentle speed. It's not blasting out the air, but it is absolutely more than enough to feel from across the room even. And it's almost inaudible. Okay, let's go up to the medium. Oh, I forgot the power draw. Jeez. Okay, on the low, it is 1.62 amps, 94 watts, and 0.48 for the power factor. Okay, let's go to the medium. Which, for whatever reason, does not really operate quite correctly until the motor warms up. See, now it's really starting to shake a little bit. Frame is shaking a little bit too. Yeah, it's really out of balance. I should try and correct this. I think I have tried before. Okay, so this is 1.95 amps, 120 watts, and a power factor of 0.5, and the velocity of this fan is very low, but the CFM is outrageous. I mean, you could just feel the air recirculating back into the fan. It's moving a very high volume of air, It's still very quiet. Okay, now we'll go to the high. This is 2.8 amps, 2.77, 2.79, 179 watts, and a power factor of 0.53. It's really throwing out the air. And it's not that loud. That's what I really like about these. They're very, very quiet. It's a very good blade design. Well, you can see it's shaking terrifically. It really is super out of line. I gotta try to fix that. Look how bad it's shaking. Go ahead and cut it off. And remember, this has never really been oiled. I've never torn the motor apart and oiled it. And it doesn't really at all seem like it needs it. In fact, the bearings are so free it's going to spin back a little bit. Okay, so now let's go into the reverse, which is controlled over here. And we'll show it in the reverse. Even on low, like, look how much air it's drawing in. That's incredible. This is not like right in front of the fan either. It's several inches away from the fan, and it's still it's incredible the amount of air this thing moves. It's really incredible. I think these are probably the most powerful plastic blade box fans there were. Not in terms of velocity, but in terms of volume. Absolutely remarkable. The hub doesn't seem to shake quite as bad on reverse, but the whole thing is still shaking pretty good. And as you can see here, The bearings are fine. You got plenty of lubrication in there still. It only really has a startup sound on low, so let's go ahead and capture that, and then we'll wrap up the video. It even just sounds like a quality, powerful appliance. So that'll be it for this one. The General Electric 3-speed electrically reversible box fan. Which does not need to be oiled.